For years, I made the same mistake that many gardeners still make today. I poured away the water left after soaking buckwheat because I thought it had no value at all. I never imagined that something so simple could quietly become one of the most useful helpers in my vegetable garden. If you keep throwing this water away, you may also be throwing away healthier plants, stronger roots, and a better harvest without even knowing it. I learned this lesson much later than I wish I had, and once I saw the difference with my own eyes, I never wasted buckwheat water again. I'm not talking about expensive fertilizers or miracle products because I have never believed that the best answer always comes from a bottle with a colorful label. Over many years, I discovered that some of the simplest habits often give the most satisfying results, and they cost almost nothing. Buckwheat water became one of those habits for me. At first, I did not believe it could matter because it looked like ordinary cloudy water. There was nothing special about it and no strong smell that made me think it was useful. But an older gardener once smiled when he saw me emptying the bowl into the sink. He told me to save it next time and pour it around my garden instead. I almost laughed because it sounded too simple to be worth trying. Still, I respected the man because his tomatoes were always heavy, his peppers looked healthy, and his cucumbers kept producing long after everyone else's had slowed down. So I decided to test his advice in one small corner of my garden. I did not expect anything dramatic, and I certainly was not looking for magic. I only wanted to see whether this forgotten habit had any real value. After a couple of weeks, I began noticing little differences that most people would probably ignore. The leaves looked fresher, the plants seemed calmer during warm afternoons, and the soil stayed in better condition after watering. Those small changes made me curious because gardening has taught me that the biggest harvests often begin with the smallest observations. Today, I want to share exactly how I use buckwheat water, what mistakes almost everyone makes without realizing it, and why I believe this old method deserves a place in every simple garden. But before I explain the first important step, there is one mistake that can completely ruin the whole idea, and that is where most people unknowingly go wrong. That when I became curious, I also discovered that many people make the biggest mistake before they even reach the garden. They use the wrong water. If the buckwheat has been cooked with salt or mixed with butter or spices, that water should never be poured around vegetables. I only keep the water from soaking raw buckwheat or from gently rinsing it before cooking. That simple difference matters more than most people realize. Salt slowly builds up in the soil, and plants do not appreciate it. Years ago, I made that mistake once, and the leaves on a few young lettuce plants quickly reminded me that simple does not mean careless. Since then, I have always kept this rule in mind. I soak the buckwheat in clean water for several hours, then I save that cloudy liquid instead of pouring it away. I do not store it for many days because fresh water always gives me the best results. Usually, I use it the same day or the next morning. Another thing that surprised me is that I never pour large amounts around one plant. Many beginners believe that if a little is good, then a lot must be even better. Gardening has taught me the opposite. Plants like balance. I simply pour a moderate amount around the base of tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, beans, or leafy greens, and let the soil absorb it slowly. I never splash it over the leaves because that is not necessary. The roots are where I want the moisture to go. Over time, I noticed that the soil seemed easier to work with after regular watering like this. It stayed softer and did not become as hard after hot, sunny days. That alone saved me time because I did not have to loosen the ground as often. One older neighbor laughed when he saw me carrying a bucket of cloudy water through the garden. A month later, he asked why my pepper plants looked stronger than usual. I smiled because I remembered our first conversation years before. Sometimes the oldest methods travel quietly from one gardener to another without ever appearing in a gardening magazine. That is one reason I enjoy sharing these habits today. They are easy to try and they cost almost nothing. But there is another small detail that makes this method much more effective, and very few people pay attention to it. Once I understood that simple timing could change the result, I never watered the same way again, and that is exactly what I want to show you next. The next lesson came from watching my own garden instead of listening to every piece of advice I heard. I noticed that the same bucket of buckwheat water could give different results depending on when I used it. At first, I watered whenever I had time. Sometimes it was in the middle of a hot afternoon because I was already outside working. I thought water was water and the plants would take what they needed. After a while, I realized that many of the benefits disappeared on the hottest days because the moisture left the surface too quickly. An older friend who had spent his whole life growing vegetables told me something very simple. He said the garden wakes up slowly, just like people do, and it appreciates a calm start to the day. Since then, I have used buckwheat water either early in the morning or in the evening when the sun is low. The soil stays cool longer, and the moisture has time to move down toward the roots where it belongs. I also avoid watering before heavy rain because nature will already do that job for me. Little decisions like these may seem too small to matter, but over an entire growing season, they become surprisingly important. I have repeated this habit year after year, and I have learned that steady care almost always beats dramatic changes. Many people search for one miracle product that will solve every problem in the garden. I stopped believing in that long ago. Healthy gardens are usually built from many small good habits working together. Saving buckwheat water is only one of those habits, but it fits perfectly into that simple way of gardening. I also like the feeling that nothing useful goes to waste. Instead of pouring something down the sink, I can give it another purpose before it returns to the soil. That feels natural to me, and it reminds me of the way my parents and grandparents used almost everything they had. They were careful with money because they had to be, and they were careful with resources because wasting them simply did not make sense. I think many of those old ideas still deserve a place in today's gardens. There is another detail that surprised me even more, because I discovered that not every vegetable responds in exactly the same way. Some plants seem to appreciate this old method much more than others, and once I noticed the pattern, I started using buckwheat water differently depending on what was growing in each bed. That simple change gave me another useful advantage which I will explain next. After using this method for several seasons, I began noticing that some vegetables seemed to enjoy buckwheat water more than others. My tomatoes were usually the first to show the difference. Their leaves stayed a healthy green, and the plants looked steady even during warm weeks when they normally showed signs of stress. My peppers also responded well. They did not suddenly produce twice as much fruit because I have never believed in unrealistic promises, but they seemed to grow with more confidence and stayed productive for a longer period. Cucumbers also became part of my regular routine because they appreciate consistent moisture around their roots. I never expect one simple habit to replace good soil, proper sunlight, or regular care. Those things always come first. Buckwheat water is simply one extra step that fits naturally into a healthy gardening routine. I also learned that young seedlings should be treated gently. I never pour large amounts around freshly planted vegetables because their roots are still developing. A small amount is enough. As the plants become stronger, I gradually increase the quantity while always watching how the soil responds. Gardening has taught me to observe before making changes. Every garden is different because every season is different. One year may be rainy while the next is dry. Paying attention has always helped me more than following strict rules. Another small habit I never skip is watering ordinary clean water first if the soil has become completely dry. Very dry soil often lets moisture run away before it reaches the roots. Once the ground has absorbed a little clean water, I add the buckwheat water around the base of the plant. This simple order seems to work much better in my experience. I also avoid using it every single day because balance has always given me the best results. I may use buckwheat water once every week or two during the growing season depending on how much I have available. There is no reason to force it. One thing I enjoy most is knowing that I am saving money while wasting less in the kitchen. Small habits like this remind me that a productive garden does not always depend on buying another product from the store. Sometimes the answer is already sitting on the kitchen counter waiting to be noticed. But there is another mistake that many gardeners make after they begin using this method. They combine it with practices that quietly reduce the benefits without realizing it. Once I understood that connection, my garden became much easier to manage, and the results were more consistent throughout the season. One mistake I see again and again is that people become excited after hearing about a simple old method and they begin using it for everything. I understand that feeling because I have done the same more than once over the years. But a garden always reminds us that too much of even a good thing is rarely the right answer. Buckwheat water should never replace regular watering. Plants still need clean water to stay healthy, especially during long dry periods. I simply think of buckwheat water as an occasional helper, not as the entire solution. Another mistake is forgetting to pay attention to the condition of the soil itself. If the ground has become hard like stone or stays wet for days after every rain, no simple homemade method will solve that problem by itself. Healthy soil is always the foundation of a healthy garden. That is why I continue adding compost every season, removing weeds before they become a problem, and keeping a light layer of mulch around many of my vegetables. These small habits work together, and buckwheat water becomes just one more useful part of the routine. I have also learned not to expect instant changes. Many people try something once and then decide after 2 days that it does not work. Gardening has never rewarded impatience. The best results usually appear little by little until one morning you suddenly realize your plants look stronger than they did a few weeks earlier. I enjoy that quiet kind of progress because it feels honest. Nothing dramatic happens overnight, but the garden slowly shows you that your steady care has been worthwhile. I also keep a simple notebook where I write down when I use different methods and how each crop responds. I do not fill pages with complicated information. I only write a few short notes about the weather, watering, and harvest. Those notes have taught me more than I expected because memory is not always as reliable as we think. Looking back over several seasons helps me notice patterns that I would otherwise forget. Some years are hotter, some are cooler, and every season teaches something new. That is one reason I still enjoy gardening after all these years. There is always another lesson waiting in the next growing season. Before we finish, I want to tell you about the biggest reward this simple habit has given me, and surprisingly, it has very little to do with vegetables themselves. That final lesson may be the most valuable one of all because it changed the way I look at everyday life as much as the way I care for my garden dot. After all these years, I have realized that the greatest reward from using simple methods like this is not only a better harvest. It is the feeling that I understand my garden a little better every season. I no longer rush to buy something every time a plant looks tired or a harvest seems smaller than I hoped. Instead, I slow down and look more carefully. I check the soil, I watch the weather, and I remember the small habits that have helped me before. Buckwheat water became one of those habits because it reminds me that useful things are often hiding in plain sight. Every time I save that cloudy water instead of pouring it into the sink, I feel that I am making good use of something that would otherwise be wasted. It takes almost no extra effort and it costs nothing. That simple feeling of saving instead of wasting has become just as satisfying as picking fresh vegetables from the garden. Friends sometimes ask me whether this old method is difficult to fit into everyday life. I always smile because it may be one of the easiest gardening habits I have ever adopted. While the vegetables are growing, I already prepare meals for my family, and saving the soaking water takes only a few seconds. The next time I walk outside with a watering can, I simply bring that bowl with me. There is nothing complicated about it. I think that is one reason why I have continued doing it for so many years. Simple habits are easier to keep than complicated ones. They quietly become part of your routine until you no longer think about them. I also enjoy sharing this idea with younger gardeners because many of them believe successful gardening always depends on expensive products or complicated techniques. I tell them that experience has taught me something very different. Good soil, careful observation, regular watering, patience, and a few forgotten old habits often produce results that money alone cannot buy. Every season reminds me that nature usually responds best to steady care rather than constant changes. There are always new ideas to try, but I never forget the simple methods that have earned my trust over many years. Before we finish, there is one final thought I want to leave with you because it may encourage you to look at many other everyday kitchen leftovers in a completely different way. Sometimes one small change leads to another, and before you realize it, your entire gardening routine becomes simpler, less expensive, and far more satisfying than you ever expected. When I look back at everything I have learned over the years, I realize that the biggest improvements in my garden rarely came from expensive products or complicated methods. They came from paying attention to the small things that many people overlook. Saving buckwheat water became one of those small habits that slowly earned my trust because it fit naturally into the way I already lived. It did not cost extra money, and it did not require special equipment. It simply asked me to stop wasting something that could still be useful. That lesson has stayed with me far beyond the garden. It reminds me that nature often gives us more than we notice if we are willing to slow down and look carefully. Every growing season teaches patience because no plant changes overnight. The same is true for the gardener. We improve little by little through observation and experience. If you decide to try this method, I encourage you to keep your expectations realistic and enjoy the process as much as the results. Use clean, unsalted buckwheat soaking water. Apply it in moderation around the roots. Continue giving your plants good soil, enough sunlight, regular watering, and steady care because those things will always matter most. Then, watch your garden over the following weeks and make your own observations. Every climate, every garden, and every season is a little different, and that is part of what makes gardening so rewarding. I still become excited every time I discover another simple habit that makes life easier without making it more expensive. Those forgotten ideas deserve to be remembered because they help us waste less, save money, and enjoy the quiet satisfaction of growing healthy vegetables with our own hands. I hope this old method becomes as useful for you as it has been for me. If it helps even one of your plants grow a little stronger, then it was worth sharing. And the next time you prepare buckwheat in your kitchen, perhaps you will pause before pouring that cloudy water into the sink, because you will know it may still have one more useful job waiting outside in the garden. In my next video, I want to show you another forgotten kitchen habit that many older gardeners quietly use every season and almost nobody talks about today. Once you see how simple it is, you may never look at ordinary kitchen leftovers in the same way again.